Oh, this is so weird. Okay, so my brother knows that I have this little hobby podcast, but he's never been home when I've recorded before, and he's right outside the door, and I don't know how loud I can be. Um, so it's just kind of weird, and we're gonna roll with it today. I'll get used to it eventually. Plus, I don't know how else to start an episode, so let's just pretend this is an ad and I'm getting paid for it. Ba-da! Thank you for your patience. Good morning, and welcome everybody to another simply fascinating installment of Murder in the Morning. Does anybody else feel like they can't do anything productive at home? I swear I've tried to write these episodes on my couch or at my desk, but it never turns into anything good. Maybe there aren't enough distractions or it's almost too quiet at home. I feel like as if I need to see other people doing work so I don't get as much FOMO. I don't know. Whatever the case, there I was, sitting in Starbucks, sucking down my diabetes cup, listening to these two adorable elderly men talk about the original Top Gun and how it's that much better, and DEFCON 3, whatever that is. But I'm rambling, probably low-key trying to squeeze in an extra minute of this intro. Time to move on. So, my sources today, of course, Wikipedia, Murderpedia, a CBS article, an article by Emily Gillespie, maybe, from the Columbian, and the rest I'll just put in the notes below. So, as we all know, we're living in an era of true crime, with cold cases thawing out and DNA proving more useful than ever before. It seems like every month there's a new update, whether that be an old one or a new one. But I think this is hugely important for one reason. These new technologies at our disposal give investigators a legitimate reason to look back and re-examine forgotten cases, or cases that were left half-finished. These half-finished cases, mind you, are almost as bothersome as those crappy cold ones. So today, folks, I bring you the story of serial killer Warren Leslie Forrest. And while his name may not ring a bell right away, his crimes most certainly will. Overshadowed by much more well-known Washington state serial killers such as Ted Bundy, Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer, or the Tube Sock Killer, Warren Leslie Forrest is not a man to forget about, and nor should we, yet. Or rather, let's not forget about his victims. So, while Forrest may have been locked up decades ago, multiple of his victims still remain missing, or alleged victims even. So Warren Forrest, born in June of 1949 in Vancouver, Washington, he did not have the typical serial killer upbringing, with no mention of abuse, neglect, or head trauma in any article I read. Warren seemed to be on the right path, with two respected parents, a respected family. Throughout his high school and early life, Warren was quite successful. By the time he eventually graduated in 1967, he had made the captain of the track team and was set to start his life. But soon after graduating, both Warren and his brother were drafted into the Vietnam War. Here, he worked as a missile crew service gunner, and again, I see no mention of a single traumatic experience, even in war, that would have triggered his future actions to come. And upon leaving the military, Warren, quote, returned to Vancouver and married his high school sweetheart, Sharon Ann Hart, in August of 1969, with whom he would have two children. Shortly after their marriage, they moved to Fort Bliss, Texas, and then to Newport Beach, California, where Forrest enrolled at the North American School of Conservation and Ecology, end quote. So, again, it seems like everything is moving in the right path. He's got a wife, he has two kids, he's starting a new path of education. But this would prove to be short-lived, however. He soon dropped out and moved the family back to Washington State. Here they settled in a town called Battleground, which is roughly 30 minutes north of Vancouver and the Portland state line. Warren here found himself a job at the Clark County Parks Department. And for those who aren't familiar, again, Clark County is essentially like the last stop before you leave civilization between Vancouver and endless mountains and forest. And this, it seems, is when something changed in Warren. This apparent doting family man unleashed his true self. Okay, before we go into this, I want to explain a couple things up front here. First off, like I said previously, Forrest has not been formally charged with all of his crimes I'm about to present to you. However, due to the location of crimes, MOs, and other similarities, investigators are compelled to believe he is and will remain the prime suspect for the murders and disappearances of between 6 to 9 women. Second off, the timeline of this case is honestly quite confusing. It took me a while to piece together what was actually happening. For example, when bodies were discovered years later from when they went missing, or charges coming up decades after the crime actually occurred, it can be a bit overwhelming. So just to try to keep it simple, and I hope I do an okay job, I will first go over every suspected crime as it happened in order, and then when and if Warren was charged for the crimes. Whew. Wow, okay. I just tired myself out there. Anywho, our first victim initially was never actually considered a victim of Warren's until later evidence was found. So on December 7th, 1971, Jamie Grissom disappeared while walking home from school. It was initially thought that she ran away, of course, like they always do. But during a later search, many of her items, including her ID and her purse, were found in Dole Valley, just miles northeast of Battleground, and her body remains missing to this day. Last seen on February 11th, a couple months later, the next year, 1972, college student Barbara Derry disappeared while hitchhiking along State Highway 14 away from Vancouver. Over a month and a half later, her body was discovered at Grist Mill, which is a park located in Clark County. She, quote, was covered with boards and debris, partially disrobed, missing a bra. The cause of death was discovered to have been caused by one stab wound to the heart with a narrow-bladed instrument. Identification was established through her dentals, end quote. And then again, just over 2 years later, 14-year-old Diane Gilchrist, quote, left their home in downtown Vancouver through her bedroom window on the second floor and then vanished into the night. She has never been found and her fate remains unclear, end quote. 2 days later, senior or 12th grader Gloria Knutson was walking home from a club when she went missing. One witness told police that Knutson sought his help in the early morning, claiming that somebody had attempted to rape her and was now stalking her. The man claimed that she had asked him to drive her home, but his car was out of gas. So, distraught, Knutson decided to walk home and disappeared into the night soon after. Again, she remains missing for a period of time after her disappearance. On July 11th, 1974, Krista Blake went missing. She was seen by a witness getting into a blue van driven by a white male, and again, her body remained missing for some time after. Barely a week after this, a 14-year-old girl hitchhiking along State Highway 502 is picked up and held at knife point. And for 13 fucking miles, this poor girl was threatened with abuse and rape until they reached the Tukes Mountain area, again within Clark County. The man parked here and she was, quote, beaten while still in the van, then taken into the woods and hogtied to a tree. The victim's bra was cut off and used as a gag. The suspect left her tied at this location, saying he would return later, end quote. Thankfully, she was able to chew through her bonds and escape, and she was able to hop away to a nearby field and hide until morning, where some much nicer park employees found her the next day and helped her out. This abductor, though, he was so stupid. He was dumb enough to actually return to the scene of the crime the night after she had been found. Like, he knew she was gone, and he still decided to go back to the scene of the crime. And he apparently returned to collect the binding and the gags that he had used on the escaped target. Luckily for investigators, 2 witnesses placed a blue van at the scene of the crime during this time. Sadly, but understandably, the young girl, the 15-year-old in question here, she did not report her abduction to police immediately. As we all understand, that was extremely traumatic. But this left this monster to continue his treachery unobstructed. So the following month, 20-year-old Carol Platt Valenzuela went missing again while hitchhiking from Camas to Vancouver, Washington. And I've only been there once, but I stayed in Camas, or Camas, however you pronounce it, and it's like a 25, 30-minute drive from Vancouver. So again, very relatively close. And years passed before her remains were found after she went missing. So enter fall. It's now been 2 months since anyone went missing or another body had been found. On October 1st, 20-year-old college student Daria Whiteman was lured into Warren's van under the false pretense of a photo shoot. Instead, quote, he drove to a city park and assaulted her, raping Whiteman several times, torturing her and shooting her with darts from an air-powered dart gun. Forrest then drove her to Camas, Washington, where he stabbed her 6 times with a knife near La Camas Lake and attempted to strangle her. End quote. Thankfully, again, he made another mistake. Daria was not dead. Surprisingly, 2 hours after the attack, she woke up and managed to find her way to a hospital. Like after 6 stab wounds with a knife and a strangulation. It's insane. And later, in stable condition, she was able to provide an amazing description for investigators, which proved to be a massive break that they had been waiting for. According to her testimony, he drove a blue 1973 Ford van and had greeted several park employees while driving through the area. As the park was under the As the park was under the Parks Department jurisdiction, police assumed that the perpetrator was an employee and started looking into the alibis of said employees. And this examination of the Parks Department was very, very beneficial. As they continued to eliminate suspects, Warren Leslie Forrest looked better and better and better. He had been, quote, sick from work the day of the attack. He owned a 1973 blue Ford van, and he matched Daria's description of the attacker. So this was enough for police to get a search warrant. And, quote, while searching his home, officers found jewelry and clothing fragments that belonged to Daria Whiteman, who also conclusively identifies him as her attacker once she was presented a photograph of him. End quote. Forrest himself was unable to provide any convincing alibi, so he was charged that same day that they brought him in for questioning. So now here, the investigation really starts to heat up. After Warren's arrest went public, police got a call from a young girl, 15-year-old Norma Countryman. She was the unnamed 15-year-old from earlier. She reached out to investigators with a harrowing story. So, according to Norma's testimony, quote, on July 17th, she was attempting to hitchhike out of Ridgefield and voluntarily got into Forrest's van when he offered her a ride. During said ride, she was raped, beaten, and after reaching the slopes of the Tuque Mountains, she was bound, gagged, and tied to a tree. Forrest intended to kill her, but as we mentioned before, Countryman managed to chew through the gag, hide in some bushes. When she came out of hiding, looked for help, and was found. End quote. I botched the end of that sentence, but you got the gist of it. Despite her testimony, despite Norma's insane testimony, the court went forward only with the Daria indictment and charged Warren with 1 count of attempted murder. Okay, great, right? Unfortunately, this guy had a few decent lawyers underneath him somehow, and soon they played their hand. Quote, his legal team filed a motion for a psychiatric evaluation which determined that Forrest was legally insane. He was thus acquitted by reason of insanity and ordered to undergo treatment at the Western State Hospital in Lakewood, end quote. And this was so surprising to me because, I mean, just from everything I've heard in the past, reading and podcasts, articles, blah, 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 I know how hard it is to prove insanity. I mean, at least now, maybe it wasn't back then, but it's a very difficult thing to get away with. So let's keep that in mind, that during his arrest and first trial, while he was in this state hospital in Lakewood, investigators are still finding remains. So even though no new people are going missing, bodies are still turning up. On October 12th, 1974, police uncovered the body from before Carol Valenzuela. Oh my gosh, I'm struggling. And another unnamed Jane Doe, who was later identified as Martha Morrison. Both are found in the Dole Valley, which is, again, in the area of Clark County. Interestingly, Carol, who was first a suspect of Warren's, she was later to be determined a victim of Ted Bundy. And while the other remains of Martha Morrison, those are more closely related to Warren. It's just so crazy to me that multiple serial killers were not only active at the same time in the same area, but they were also dumping bodies in the same freaking spots. Can you, like, what did they have, a Slack group chat back then? Like, ding, Gary Ridgway has sent you a message. Quote, hey guys, I'm going out to the river today if you want me to get rid of anything for you. I don't know. Anyways, Mr. Scumbag over here, he deteriorates in the mental hospital. Life on the outside continues. 2 years pass before anything of note comes into play. And on July 16th, 1976, almost 2 years after the disappearance, Krista Blake's remains were finally unearthed. While mushroom picking in the Tukes Mountain area, 2 Portland residents noticed a shoe sticking out of some bushes. Quote, when they pulled it, the pair saw a skeletal leg and reported the find to the local police, who unearthed the half-skeletonized body of a young woman. Forensic examination of the jaw led scientists determine that the remains belonged to 20-year-old Krista K. Blake, a hitchhiker who had gone missing in Vancouver on July 11, 1974. End quote. And again, witness statements from years before mentioned seeing this blue Ford van being driven by a white male. So this was enough to bring Warren under suspicion for Krista's murder, as well as the attempted murder of Daria. And over the next 2 years, police built this additional case against Forrest. And in 1978, he was formally charged with her murder. During the long and painful trial, Warren obviously continued to claim innocence, but between changing stories, weak or missing alibis, witness statements, and surviving victims, the defense faltered quickly. In the end, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. So, and that's where our story was left for years, and for a long time, it goes untouched. Decades, in fact. It's not until 2010 do we get another little break in the case. Martha Morrison's half-brother contacted the Eugene police in Oregon to submit his DNA sample, probably hoping, along with many others, that this new technology would finally give their family an answer. And it led detectives to naming the 1974 Jane Doe as Martha Morrison, which gave police another chance to get Warren on her murder as well, now that they that not only had a body, but had ID'd the body. So DNA evidence taken from Warren's dart gun, remember that weird dart gun he used, was a match to Martha Morrison's. Now, this whole process actually took years to complete. Since the physical evidence was almost 40 years old, investigators had to move very slowly and thoughtfully here, but they were able to prove it. And during this new investigation into Martha's murder, Warren was still taking parole hearings, and surprisingly, in a 2017 hearing, Forrest ended up confessing to the murder of Krista and the 2 kidnappings of Daria and Norma Countryman, although he remained adamant that he had not killed anyone else, period. In fact, in total, he confesses to 16 additional crimes, including voyeurism, but never any additional killings. Obviously, the parole board is well aware of the danger he still poses and rejected any notion of the release during this hearing. 2 more years go by, and finally, in December of 2019, just a couple years ago, Warren was formally charged with the 1974 murder of 17-year-old Martha Morrison. Due to COVID, of course, his trial was put off until early 2023 of this year. Quote, the trial finally resumed in 2023, and on February 1st, a jury found Forrest guilty of the murder of Martha Morrison. 16 days later, he was handed down another life sentence. During the proceedings, he was still apprehensive about admitting his guilt, but expressed his opinion that girls from socially disadvantaged environments should not hitchhike or get into cars with strangers due to their vulnerable disposition. End quote. What? That's your 2 cents, buddy, at the end of all of this? Don't hitchhike? And I know that isn't technically an admission of guilt, but almost every single one of his suspected victims was last seen hitchhiking or getting into his fucking van. So you tell me it wasn't him. Obviously, it's wonderful to officially get the guy who you know just did it after 40 years. But we have to remember that there are still missing girls out there who need justice too. Both Jamie Grissom and Diane Gilchrist, two teens when they disappeared, are still missing and have yet to be found and returned to their families. So this case is not over yet. It's only a matter of time before we find these girls too. Morrison's brother, Martha Morrison's half-brother, said in an interview that there is still plenty of work to be done. Quote, "This isn't just about killing Martha. It's about the rest of us that have had to deal with this for years and years. That's hard on people." End quote. Yeah, that's probably pretty hard on everybody. I can't even comprehend that. But I think he's got a good head on his shoulders there. I don't know what else to say. That's about it. I hope we find those girls. I hope this guy continues to rot in prison or confesses to additional crimes. Either way, I really hope my brother didn't hear any of that. I'm ready to get teased when I leave. Oh well. Okay, time to go. I love you. Bye-bye.